All right, welcome back to Keepin the Comic, and today we're diving into issue number 2 here of the Aliens versus Avengers story. And this is where we get some backstory here on really where this whole Xenomorph infection started off in the first place, going way back. We also get a really insane twist that I love, and I think that you will like too. And I really love what Hulk does in this particular issue, but I also have a little bit of a bone here to pick with the other Avengers, and you will see why. Now, we start off in this one here in another universe at another time, and here we see these androids, or more specifically, they're called synthetics. Now, this synthetic here called David 8 was created by Peter Whalen, and he's looking down on their creators, and he's looking in disappointment, looking at them like ants, how they created all life in this universe and then created them. He mentions how he would think meeting one's creator would have some higher value, feeling more significant, but how he feels no differently about the engineers than he does humanity. How, in fact, he's actually appalled that something like this is the origin of something like him. And now, in that moment, they release what looks like a black sludge. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I have no idea what it actually is called. It didn't tell us what it was called either, which basically exterminates the group. Then we jump to 100 years later and 10,000 planets later, where the same synthetic holding a skull of some kind, he mentions how at this point they have wiped out all life from the universe and how this was the last of them. And then one person asks him if he feels sentimental or perhaps pride, but he responds back and says instead what he actually feels is relief. Then 1,000 years from that, we see him looking out into the world again with a newfound purpose. And the reason why is because they now discovered that there are many other universes, other worlds, so much more life crying out to be extinguished, and how for far too long they have been sleeping, and now they are awakened with more universes that they can cleanse. So then we jump back to this universe here where our Avengers are, but instead we jump back 20 years before. And here we see members from the Wayland Corporation finalizing a deal that will put another company under their umbrella. Now, the shocking part here is that they show us the old man that is supposed to be signing these documents, and it's actually Tony Stark. And I'm like, what? Because from like the last issue, they never told us who this old man in this chair was. And I wasn't really sure what to believe or who he was. I definitely did not expect that it was going to be Tony Stark. Although I do guess that we should have kind of known, because in issue 1, we did see in one of the panels, the yellow little quote box here with the red lettering. So that was kind of like a hint that it was him, but still, I don't think a lot of people talked about it in general. So this is where we see David 8 again, right? The synthetic. And then we see one of his people here popping a bottle of champagne. Now, Tony is like, sorry, I don't drink, which of course is like, okay. So then David 8 asks Tony, he's like, this doesn't happen often, but you've surprised me. He expected that this deal would have ended in a hostile takeover with some kind of confrontation of some sort. So he wants to know, he's like, was I expecting too much here, or was I like simply just wrong? Which is when Tony asked him the question. He's like, hey, have you ever heard of the expression playing possum? So he's like, hold on, excuse me, no, I haven't. So Tony lets him know it's when an animal pretends to be dead, but isn't. Do you have any in your universe? So he continues to mention how at first he thought David 8 was just some like run-of-the-mill corporate sociopath that was relentless and sort of just single-minded. He thought it was like uncanny the way that the Wayland Corporation never repeated their mistakes, their unemotional practicality, a lack of institutional memory, almost felt like alien, which made him curious and how it took some time to get inside of their systems, but he needed a closer look to understand what he was dealing with and how horrifying it was to find out what was actually in that box. So this is when David 8 gets all mad and then pushes over Tony. It's like, bro, why you gonna push over a man in a wheelchair? So he says to Tony how difficult it must be to have the knowledge of unavoidable extermination. So Tony asks him the question. He's like, okay, all right, like how long do we have? And then he lets him know that the seed to their extinction will arrive in 16 years and 3 months, with a projected survival to last 20 years, given their race's guile and bravado, which gives Tony everything that he needs as he puts on the Iron Man glove. And by the look of David 8's eyes, he knows that, like, hey, this is probably not going to end up turning out the way that he wants it to. So when we jump back to present time, we see David 8 on a table with his head severed in a jar while Tony looks on, which is when Captain Marvel comes in to tell him, hey, it's time, which is where this picks up on from the last issue here, where Tony tells the group that it's time to leave Earth, how it's over, how they've lost, and now they have to think about survival. So Miles doesn't like the idea, as he thinks that they're just basically giving up on the human race. But Carol is just like, listen, they haven't heard from any of the outposts or watchtowers in weeks. Nothing from Clint, nothing from Steve, Nat, or any of them. They're all that is left right now of the human race. And fortunately for them, Tony has been preparing for this moment. Now, the Venom symbiote says to Miles, he's like, listen, you got to be careful because you can only trust this one so far. Now, this is when Tony lets them know that what they've been standing on, or standing in, I should say, is not a building. Carol lets them know that there is a recon drone with eyes on them right now. Then we see this long ship right here, and then Carol mentions how Tony has been planning this thing for a long time and how Tony built an escape ship, and then as a disguise here, he built a city over this thing. But then Tony clarifies, he's like, listen, this is not an escape ship, it's a colony ship for seeding a new world. He means to populate the ship with everyone here in the city. So then Bruce lets him know, he's like, we only have 1,400 people, and how the minimum viable population to avoid extinction and manage genetic drift is higher than that. But Tony rebuttals, he's like, listen, we're not a pre-industrial species, but instead they have advantages and experts, and that ultimately he's trying to promise here, Bruce, he's like, this ultimately will be enough. So Tony sends Miles out here to go check on everyone, as they should be boarding right now, and tells them just to make sure that everyone has a fastened seatbelt on, and how later on they're going to be stopping by Mars to let mutants know that they're abandoning Earth and won't need stasis pods until after they do that. Now, the last note here of business was to Carol, who he asks, hey, are the war machines ready? So in that moment, she launches them right then. He mentions how with the walls that have been built that they have held for some time, but every now and again, an alien will get through. And with them not being able to afford not even one of them to hitch a ride, he armed the war machines and is ultimately collapsing the superstructure, and how there will be no way in after they blow all the walls. But the problem was that one of the sections did not go boom. It was only partially collapsed, and how it wasn't from the war machine itself, being that there was no failsafe on them, he realized that there is only one reason why the war machine would not have fired. And when they pan over to that section, we see old man Captain America running with hundreds of people following him. But the issue here is that they've already primed the engines and they are lifting off in less than a minute, and they're over a mile away from where they are. So Bruce wants Tony to delay the launch a bit, but with there being a big hole right now in the wall for the aliens to be able to get through, he doesn't want to risk what is left. So right on cue, the Xenomorphs now, they're right behind them waiting to go get some dinner, right? So Cap, seeing that, he tells everyone, listen, y'all keep going. And he's like, listen, I'm gonna try to do what I can. So he throws that shield while Bruce and Tony are looking on. So Bruce is like, he's like, yo, I can't just leave Captain America here to do this on his own. So he tells Carol and Tony, listen, if I do not make it back in time, just go ahead and leave. Bruce is like, yo, I can't see myself leaving my friends here just to die. While Tony thinks that trying to fight their way out of the situation is not the best approach. They need to survive, and in reality, Tony knows that they will need his mind more if the rest of them plan on surviving at all. So Bruce, being the hero, transforms into the Hulk and then jumps into the battle with Cap, landing with that loud boom. Now, when Cap sees him, he has this look on his face of like relief, but also like awe at the same time. And I can only think that to a certain extent here, it's most likely been some time since he's actually seen the Hulk too. So there also might be that emotion wrapped up into it as well. Now, back with Tony here and Carol, as they look on, Tony wants to know how long they can wait. But Carol knows that Bruce, listen, he never intended on coming back in the first place. I think she knew that if the ship was going to be able to make it out, that Hulk was doing what he thought would give them their best chance by holding off these Xenomorphs so that they can actually lift off into the sky. So Tony concedes and gives the orders to launch. And in the background, we can see the ship heading up into the sky in the background while Hulk and Cap got Xenomorphs basically draped all over him. Now, later on, we see how distressing this was to Tony. Like losing Bruce, losing Cap was ultimately not easy for him at all. It almost looks like he was kind of like throwing up a little bit here. I don't know. I could be wrong. Now, elsewhere, they show us another ship that is in orbit, and we see who's in the ship. Now, they look like the engineers that we saw at the very beginning of this issue, but I could be wrong there as well. Now, as they look on here, we start to see some dialogue, but we can't understand exactly what it is that they are saying. The only thing we see later on is that we get a word that is translated, and it says, infection. Now, personally, this was another really good issue here, and I'm liking where they're going with the story. My ultimate gripe, one of them, is that in this particular issue, I just don't believe that Captain Marvel would have not tried to go help out Captain America and Hulk. I just don't really believe that that's the truth. Now, Tony, I could probably understand, to be honest with you, and even Miles, like I just don't see where they would have said, hey, we're just gonna let Hulk and Cap do it all. And ultimately, I guess to kind of keep the story along, they chose not to bring him into the whole thing. My other gripe, man, is that we gotta wait another like 3 months before we get issue number 3. But so far, like I said, it's been a good story. Listen, like and subscribe to the channel here if you haven't done so already. Let me know what you think here about this issue here in the comments. If you haven't joined our Discord, please take some time to do that here. We do have the links in the description so that you can go ahead and do that. And also follow us on other areas here on social media. Appreciate you guys watching. And as always, thank you so much for kicking it with Keepin' It Comic. Bye.